In this episode, we're going to reinforce the core ideas that make security operations planning feel coherent instead of overwhelming, because exam pressure tends to expose weak recall and shaky connections. When you can quickly retrieve business context, attack paths, organizational risk, and planning decisions as one connected system, your answers become calmer and more consistent. Beginners often study each topic as a separate island, so they can define a term but struggle to apply it when a scenario blends multiple ideas. This review is designed to tighten the links between concepts so that when you see a question about SOC design, escalation, or priorities, you naturally think through what the organization values, how attackers could cause harm, what risks matter most, and what operational design choices follow. The goal is not to add new material, but to make what you already learned easier to access and more usable under time pressure. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start by pulling business context into your mind in a way that is practical, because business context is not vague background information. It is the foundation for prioritization. Business context means understanding what the organization exists to do, what services must stay available, what data types must be protected, and what consequences would be unacceptable. It also includes how the organization operates, such as whether it depends on remote work, cloud services, third parties, or rapid change, because those factors shape exposures and response constraints. When you recall business context quickly, you are able to interpret an alert or a scenario by asking what is at stake, not just what is happening technically. This prevents a very common mistake, which is treating every technical anomaly as equally important, even when only a few anomalies threaten critical outcomes. A manager-level mindset uses business context as the filter that sorts urgent from routine. If you can explain in a few sentences why the organization's mission and dependencies shape security priorities, you have the kind of recall the exam is looking for. Now connect business context to attack paths, because attackers succeed by moving through the environment the way it is actually built and actually used. Attack paths are the realistic sequences of steps an adversary can take from entry to impact, and they are unique because environments are unique. If the organization relies heavily on identity and remote access, a path may begin with credential theft and then move toward privileged systems. If the organization has internet-facing services, a path may begin with exploitation and then pivot towards sensitive data or operational controls. If third parties have trusted access, a path may begin outside the organization and then enter through a vendor connection that looks legitimate. The important review point is that paths often follow trust relationships, because trust is what allows movement and leverage. When you can map these paths quickly, you start seeing where layered controls should break the chain early and where monitoring should be strongest. That path thinking is what helps you choose answers that reflect realistic defense rather than generic advice. Attack paths also become easier to recall when you group them into stages that reflect attacker objectives instead of memorizing specific techniques. Early stages often involve initial access and discovery, where the attacker is trying to find a foothold and learn what exists. Middle stages often involve privilege changes, persistence, and lateral movement, where the attacker is trying to gain leverage and expand reach. Later stages often involve actions on objectives, such as data access, disruption, or extortion, where harm becomes visible. This stage view helps you anticipate what you should detect early and what evidence might appear next if a hypothesis is correct. It also helps you understand why certain architectural choices matter, such as segmentation limiting lateral movement or least privilege limiting the damage from stolen credentials. When you recall paths as objective-driven sequences, you can apply the concept to any environment without needing tool-specific knowledge. That flexibility is important for management-level questions because they test judgment, not memorized commands. Now bring organizational risk into the center, because risk is what connects business context and attack paths to concrete priorities and escalation decisions. A risk profile describes what the organization values, how harm could occur, how likely certain paths are, and how severe the impact would be if they succeed. It also includes risk appetite, which is the organization's tolerance for disruption and uncertainty, because that tolerance affects how aggressive response decisions should be. A strong risk profile is not a document that sits on a shelf. It is an operational tool that shapes what the SOC watches, what it escalates, and where it invests improvement effort. The review point to hold on to is that risk is not only about threats, it is also about visibility and control gaps. If you cannot see critical activity, uncertainty becomes risk, because late discovery often means higher damage. When you can explain risk as a combination of value, exposure, likelihood, impact, and visibility, you can justify priorities instead of guessing. To make risk usable in daily operations, remember that risk must translate into thresholds, because thresholds are what tell the SOC when to treat something as urgent. Thresholds tie severity to conditions like critical asset involvement, sensitive data exposure, privileged identity compromise, or signs of active spread. They also include confidence, because response should scale with how likely it is that the activity is truly malicious. A mature approach avoids two extremes: escalating everything because it might be serious, or escalating nothing until perfect proof exists. Instead, the SOC uses fast validation steps to increase confidence and escalates when the risk profile indicates that stakes are high enough that additional authority or expertise is needed. If you can recall this scaling logic, you will handle exam scenarios more effectively because you will choose answers that balance speed and discipline. The exam often rewards that balance because it reflects real operational maturity. Now connect risk and thresholds to SOC planning decisions, because planning is where the risk profile becomes a living operating model. Planning includes defining services, coverage models, staffing, workflows, and escalation paths, and these choices must be justified by the risk profile and business priorities. If critical risks can occur at any time, coverage must support that reality, whether through continuous monitoring, on-call support, or clear escalation. If the organization's biggest risks involve identity compromise, planning should prioritize identity visibility, strong access governance, and response playbooks that handle account abuse quickly. If compliance evidence is a major requirement, planning must include consistent documentation and reporting, not as optional work, but as part of service delivery. Planning also includes protecting the program's sustainability by allocating time for tuning and improvement, because a SOC that is always reacting cannot mature. When you recall planning as a set of choices driven by risk, you stop thinking of it as building a team and start thinking of it as designing a system. A useful review link is the relationship between services and staffing, because staffing is not just a headcount question, it is a capability question. Services define what the SOC must deliver, coverage defines when it must deliver it, and staffing provides the human capacity to make it real. If services include triage, investigation, and incident coordination, staffing must include both rapid triage capability and deeper investigative judgment, plus time for improvement work like tuning detections and refining processes. If you staff only for alert watching, the program may appear busy while failing to improve, which leads to constant noise and burnout. A program that runs well protects time for maintenance and learning because those activities reduce future workload and increase quality. This is an important point because many poor SOC programs fail not from lack of effort, but from lack of design that supports sustainable improvement. When you recall staffing as capacity for services plus improvement, your answers will reflect operational realism. Another essential connection is that planning decisions should include how work is prioritized and handed off, because continuity is part of what makes a program dependable. Prioritization ensures the most important situations receive attention first, and it should be tied to business impact, criticality, and confidence rather than to whoever shouts loudest. Handoffs preserve context across time, which prevents duplicate work and missed clues, and they require consistent documentation and clear case status. Many incidents become worse because early evidence is lost during transitions, and a well-designed SOC treats that as a process risk to control. This is why a manager view includes operational discipline, not as bureaucracy, but as a reliability mechanism. When you recall that discipline supports both speed and accuracy, You will be less tempted by answer choices that sound fast but are sloppy. Fast and sloppy often become slow and damaging later. Spaced repetition matters here because these topics are interconnected, and retrieval strength depends on your ability to move between them quickly. A useful mental exercise is to pick any alert scenario and force yourself to run it through 4 questions in order. What business outcome could this affect? What attack path could explain it? What does the risk profile say about priority and escalation? And what planning elements enable a good response? This exercise is powerful because it turns isolated knowledge into a repeatable reasoning process. It also reveals missing links, such as knowing what an attack path is but not being able to connect it to a coverage model or a staffing decision. When you find a missing link, you know exactly what to review, which keeps study time efficient. Audio-first learning works well here because you can rehearse this reasoning out loud during a walk or commute and build fluency through repetition. Another quick recall tool is recognizing the common failure patterns that appear when these connections are weak. One failure pattern is building monitoring that produces volume but not priority, leading to alert fatigue and missed critical events. Another failure pattern is designing escalation rules that are vague, leading to inconsistent behavior and leadership distrust. Another failure pattern is planning coverage and staffing based on ideal conditions, then collapsing during spikes because resilience was not built into the model. A final failure pattern is ignoring visibility gaps, creating hidden risk that is discovered only after damage is done. These patterns are not meant to scare you. They are meant to help you recognize why the connected system matters. When you see these patterns in an exam scenario, the best answer is often the one that restores clarity and defensibility by tying actions back to business context and risk. That recognition speeds up your decision-making because you are not solving the problem from scratch. As you keep reinforcing these ideas, remember that the exam is often testing whether you can choose the most defensible operational decision, not the most technically impressive one. A defensible decision is aligned with business priorities, grounded in realistic attack paths, guided by a clear risk profile, and supported by a SOC design that can actually execute the action. It respects the need for evidence and validation, but it does not freeze waiting for perfect certainty when the stakes are high. It also considers sustainability, because a response approach that burns out the team or disrupts operations constantly is not a mature solution. When you answer from this viewpoint, you will naturally select options that emphasize prioritization, visibility, clear escalation, and repeatable process. Those qualities show management-level thinking because they create reliable security outcomes. By replaying business context, attack paths, organizational risk, and planning decisions through spaced review, you are training your brain to retrieve and connect the most important ideas quickly. Business context tells you what matters and what cannot fail. Attack paths tell you how harm could realistically occur. Risk profiles tell you which scenarios deserve the most attention and how aggressive decisions should be. And planning turns those insights into services, coverage, staffing, and escalation that can function under pressure. When these ideas are connected, your reasoning becomes smoother and your decisions become more consistent, which is exactly what a proctored exam environment rewards. Keep practicing retrieval so you can explain these links without hesitation, because that fluency is what turns knowledge into performance. When you can do that, you are not just preparing to pass a test, you are building the operational mindset that the GSOM certification is designed to represent.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.